GDP and GDP per capita are garbage metrics for measuring how rich an economy is or how prosperous the people who are living in said economy are. And in this video, I will explain to you why. So I had an argument with this guy on X who proclaimed to be a libertarian, and he wrote here, and I will show you. One of the biggest fears of the Chinese dictatorship is that you learn just how much Taiwan is richer than mainland communist China. The dictatorship sinks major funds into propaganda, media influencers to show videos of shiny cities. But the data are the data. And here he shows GDP per capita from 1940 to 2022. And basically he shows that Taiwan has a higher GDP per capita than China. Now, of course, I responded and I said, GDP doesn't explain everything. How many fucking times do we have to say this? I think I need to make a video on this, which is exactly what I'm doing right now. To which he responded, and I can't really show the response here. Thankfully, I took a screenshot of it before he blocked me because he's such a pussy. But basically he said, but it's a good indicator in countries with relatively low government spending. Yes, GDP has problems, but I agree with your point, and it actually makes my point stronger because China's GDP is polluted by government spending and is actually lower. As if American or Taiwanese GDP is not polluted with government spending. So I responded, I said per capita GDP is the dumbest metric for how well a country is doing both economically and overall. The US has a higher GDP and per capita GDP, yet not safe, not clean, rampant homelessness, crumbling infrastructure, drugs problems, unaffordable healthcare for most, unaffordable housing for most, cost of living expensive as fuck for most. China has a lower GDP and per capita GDP and is doing way better than the US in all of those things. So I don't want to hear any of this GDP bullshit ever again. So basically when I wrote this this response, this so-called libertarian whatever, basically he blocked me. Okay, instead of responding to my argument. Well, I was being disrespectful because he is being an anti-China propagandist. Okay, he's being biased and he's not objective. If he said the same thing about the American economy, I would have been more objective, but he is obviously anti-China. So let me show you a few articles from the Mises Institute that I will link to in the description. So the first one is GDP is a poor measure of economic health, and I will link it in the description if you want to read it, but I just want to show you this part at the end. So basically it says the commonly used GDP per capita doesn't give useful information about the average standard of living. Equatorial Guinea has a high GDP per capita but virtually no middle class. San Francisco has a high GDP per capita, but the widespread presence of drug-addled, homeless people on the streets severely impacts quality of life. A survey should instead attempt to determine the economic condition of the average citizen of today and should include his assessment of the state. It should take a holistic view of the economy based on a sound understanding of economic theory and measure factors that drive real economic growth, such as savings. Okay, so I will link this article. It's a good article that explains why GDP is not a good measure. There is another article that I'm gonna also link in the description below. Does GDP present an accurate picture of the economy? Not likely. Again, I'm not gonna go through the whole thing, but I want to read for you the conclusion, which is real GDP growth rates does not measure the real strength of an economy, but rather reflects monetary turnover adjusted by dubious statistic called the price deflator. Obviously, then, the more money is pumped, all other things being equal, the stronger the economy appears to be. It is not surprising Keynesian economists believe that the Fed can drive the economy since the central bank can influence the GDP growth rates by means of monetary pumping. Through the real GDP statistic, Fed policymakers and government officials create an illusion that they can create economic growth. In reality, economic intervention by the Federal Reserve and the government in the long run can make things worse, which is exactly what's happening in the United States. Now, the reason why I defend China is because I live in China, and I know that China has, first of all, prices in China are third world. In other words, they are absolutely cheap, very cheap. Everything is very cheap and affordable here. And there is a huge amount of goods and services that you can buy and you can consume in China. So that's what makes an economy rich. It's the goods and services available in said economy and how affordable these goods and services are. Of course, plus infrastructure, plus healthcare, plus education, plus safety, plus all of these things. These are the things that that tell you if an economy is doing well or not, if it's healthy or not, if the people are living well or not. But if you just show me GDP per capita and you say that this country is richer than that country, of course I'm not going to take you seriously. GDP measures consumption, okay? It doesn't measure affordability. It doesn't measure the purchasing power of the people. In other words, is the money, is the salary or the wage you make can actually buy the services that you need for the entire month? And are you able to save something or not? GDP doesn't measure any of these things. So if you want to measure the health of an economy, look at the inflation rate, look at the affordability of goods and services, look at the affordability of housing, look at the infrastructure as well. If you live in a country or in a city that has good infrastructure, of course, that gives you a better quality of life than if you live in a city that has a crumbling infrastructure, plus drugs, plus homelessness, plus criminals, plus all of these things. So China, by every metric, by every good measure, is better than the United States, although it has a lower GDP and GDP per capita. So I want to show you here some other data. I have here Singapore. Now, I used to praise Singapore a lot. I still like it. I was there last month. And I have to say, it felt like a downgrade from China because, you know, the infrastructure in Singapore is kind of old and it's aging. It's not as new and it's not as world class as China. And of course, if you go to Guangzhou in China, you're going to find that the infrastructure is also a little bit Asian, but it's not as Asian, it's not as old as that of Singapore. So yes, Singapore is good, but here is the thing. Singapore, when I went to Singapore, I felt like I'm in a small, a hot, super humid, overpriced China. That's all what I felt. I didn't see anything, you know, anything impressive compared to China. So that's why I felt like it was a downgrade. And not only that, but Singapore is one of the most expensive countries in Asia. In fact, it's one of the most expensive countries in the world. It's more expensive, like the affordability or cost of living in Singapore is more expensive than every European country except Switzerland. And as you can see here, GDP per capita of Singapore is $127,000. And the inflation rate, I was actually surprised to see this. This is data based on 2022, but the inflation rate is 6.12%. And I'm assuming it's higher than that because governments, of course, they are not that accurate when it comes to inflation. So inflation in Singapore is high. It's not affordable. Real estate in Singapore is extremely unaffordable. Well, for expats, not for Singaporeans. I think that the government subsidizes housing for Singaporeans. And yeah, so here we have Singapore. It has a higher GDP per capita compared to China. But I still think that it's better to live in China than live in Singapore in terms of the weather, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the affordability, and all of these things. Now, let's take another example. Now, let's take the United States. So if we look at the United States, of course, it has a GDP per capita of $76,000. And the inflation rates, of course, these are the numbers of 2022. I'm pretty fucking sure it's way higher now in 2025. So the inflation in 2022, I mean, the government reported inflation is 8%. Of course, it's way higher than that. So the inflation is 8%, and like I said, they have a higher GDP per capita. Yet the United States has a crumbling infrastructure. It's not safe, like I've said. It has a drug problem. It has homelessness. It has all of these things. They are financing wars. They are printing money. So the United States, a lot of people in the United States are also living paycheck to paycheck. And also, if we check home ownership, if we check the United States, only 65% of the American population owns a home. Whereas if we compare it to China, which has a lower GDP and GDP per capita, approximately 90% of the people in China own their home. Okay, now let's look at the Chinese GDP per capita. It's based on this report from 2022. It's 21,000, so it's lower than America, but yet home ownership in China is higher. Affordability is much better than America, much better than Singapore, much better than any other country in the world, I would even say, compared to the quality of the infrastructure of public services, of healthcare, of pretty much everything that you can find in China. And here is the other thing also. If we look at inflation in China, it's 1.9. This is, of course, 2022. It's barely 2%. Now, of course, it might be higher than what is reported, but prices are actually going down in China, especially in real estate. So it's actually things are getting cheaper, not more expensive compared to the United States and the rest of the world. I'm from Morocco. Everything is getting more expensive in Morocco. Real estate, groceries, basically the cost of living skyrocketed. And so Morocco is also, regardless of GDP or GDP per capita, which is also low, quality of life is not affordable there, and home ownership is also not as good. So yeah, the main point here is that GDP and GDP per capita, first of all, GDP measures consumption, not production. And GDP per capita doesn't really tell you the health of an economy, and it doesn't tell you how prosperous the people of said economy are. Just because a country has a higher GDP or a higher GDP per capita doesn't mean that most people in that country are living comfortably and they are able to afford everything and they are able to save some money for the future. Okay. I couldn't find the data on household savings, but I think in the United States it's very low because most people live paycheck to paycheck, and now even DoorDash can be financed. Gambling is rampant. All these are symptoms of a dying empire and of a crumbling economy. And compared to China, most people actually save a lot of money in China. They take less loans compared to Americans. They own their homes. The percentage of the population that owns their homes is way higher than America. And so by every measure of what makes life, of what makes living good and what improves the quality of life, China is beating pretty much every other country, and it has a lower GDP and GDP per capita. So yeah, that's all I have to say in this video. I know it's not about Bitcoin, but of course it's about economics. And the good thing about Bitcoin is that if you live in any of these countries that have, now of course Bitcoin cannot solve the infrastructure problem, cannot solve the unaffordability problem. That can only be solved if you increase your income. But Bitcoin can help you, of course, retain or even increase the value of your savings, which is good. If you manage to save, and you should, and I think you should, I think anyone can manage to save. Even when I was broke as hell, I managed to save money. So even if you are broke, you can manage to save some little money in Bitcoin, and at least you would know that the money you save is not being melted by the money printer, and in fact it's going to appreciate more in the upcoming years. So yeah, this guy Rafael Lima, Brazilian bullshitter who blocked me, so-called libertarian, doesn't understand economics. He's driven by anti-China sentiment, like all the anti-China propagandists that get funded to spread bullshit about China. I'm just being objective. China is doing better economically than many of these countries. They're actually producing a lot of goods and services. And when you live in a Chinese city, you do feel that the economy is good and the cost of living is very cheap and the quality of life. I mean, you pay third world prices for world-class goods and services and public infrastructure. That's basically what living in China is. And I can't think of any other country that has this combination. So yeah, that's all I have to say in this video. Let me guys know what you think in the comments below. Follow me on X. I'm active on X. I'm gonna be more active on X in 2026. And see you in the next one. Take care.